You're on a special edition of the John Fredericks Radio Network, our podcast. We're live at Corey Lewandowski National Galactic Embassy headquarters here in the Eastern Market part of town. This is where our studio is in Washington, D.C. And Corey is with us now. Corey Lewandowski, as you know, the former campaign manager for the Trump for President campaign. He's also very close to the president, talks to him almost on a every other day basis, and he's an advisor of his informally. Corey also spent a long time in Trump Tower, worked with Michael Cohen during that campaign, and he is sitting down with us now. We're going to be talking about the Cohen plea and what this all means. Corey Lewandowski, thanks for joining us.
Well, it's great to have you in my home here, John, or my office, I guess.
Well, it's office and home, and I'm here every day. Well, sometimes it's great to be here, and thanks for having me. And I should probably restock the refrigerator once in a while. I guess I'm going to have to think about doing that. I came in today and I'm like, I forgot to buy all these things to restock you up. But
we'll be okay. All the water you can drink, the best Anacostia water you can drink, John. Don't worry.
I know you do have great water. Corey, I wanted to sit down with you on this special podcast here for a few moments. The Michael Cohen plea yesterday, Trump's lawyer, friend for a decade, very close to him, seemed to have turned on the president. Also, a parting shot that he gave saying that he was told by a federal candidate about that he should pay this money to these two women. You've worked with Michael Cohen, obviously, in Trump Tower when you ran the campaign, and Cohen was Trump's lawyer. What do you make of this, Corey?
Well, you know, John, I know Michael Cohen very, very well, and I think your listeners know I grew up in a place called Lowell, Massachusetts, and in Lowell, Massachusetts, in order to survive that blue-collar town, you had to be able to read people. And I could read Michael Cohen within the first 5 minutes of meeting Michael Cohen, and I knew immediately that he was not the type of person we wanted on the campaign. So from the time I walked in the door at Trump Tower and started working for then Mr. Trump, to the day I left after we had helped him secure the Republican nomination, I was adamant and steadfast that Michael Cohen had no role in the campaign whatsoever. No formal role, no informal role. As a matter of fact, most of the time that I was at the campaign, Michael Cohen was out doing rogue events, booking himself on television to be himself designated as a surrogate for the campaign, of which he never was, because he's a person who is very good about talking about things but never executing things. And so what we've learned now with the Michael Cohen plea as of yesterday is once again Michael Cohen has changed his story about what has transpired on these alleged payments to these individuals. It's very important. Michael Cohen has now pled guilty to, I think, 8 different counts. 6 of those counts have absolutely nothing to do with Donald Trump, the Trump campaign, or the Trump organization. They include filing false tax returns. They include lying on bank statements for loans as it relates to his taxi medallion business. What we know is Michael Cohen had $14 million in debt and had to lie on his financial disclosure statements in order to secure more money to stay afloat. So put those 6 things aside that he is now admitted to lying to, which has nothing to do with the Trump organization or candidate Trump or the Trump campaign. The last 2, which are the ones where Michael Cohen has lied now and said that he was directed by candidate Trump to make payments to 2 individuals. When Michael was first asked about this, he said Donald Trump didn't know anything about this. Then he said he paid for it on his own and was never reimbursed. Then he said it was fake news that this was being reported. Then he said that Donald Trump didn't direct him to do it. And now, only after the Southern District of New York has come after Michael for 6 other counts, which is failing to file accurate tax returns, right? He hid $4.1 million from the government. Clearly not an upstanding individual. Only now, in order for him to try and accuse Donald Trump of something, do we have to look back at Michael's pattern of lies. I know Michael exceptionally well. I refused to talk on the phone to Michael Cohen for the time I was at the campaign. I refused to sit in his office because people told me he was recording conversations. And you have to look at the totality of what Michael is doing. He's clearly has tax ramifications and violations that he has admitted to. He clearly has bank fraud violations that he admitted to. And now he's trying to make accusations that he was told, which is contrary to his own statements on multiple occasions, that Donald Trump told him to make these payments. You can't believe a word that comes out of Michael's mouth.
The Cohen allegations that have anything to do, and you're right, 6 of the 8 counts that he pleaded out on have nothing to do with Donald J. Trump or the Trump campaign or you or anything else. The 2 of them that stem from potential campaign violations in Federal Election Commission laws, that's very murky also, because even if we had 2 lawyers on today, Corey, who said that even if the president, candidate Trump at the time, business mogul at the time, paid money for people to be silent just because he didn't want to deal with it, that there isn't anything illegal about that. Well, it's perfectly legal.
There's nothing illegal about that, John. And look, I'm not an attorney, to be clear, right up front, okay? But if in the course of business, a business has a transaction, and don't forget, there is a Trump organization which is a business, and they decide to pay somebody for a service or put a contract in place and have a non-disclosure agreement in the course of standard business, that's perfectly legal to do. If Michael Cohen did this on his own, which is what he said he did, Michael Cohen said that he did this on his own, and now what we're seeing is Michael Cohen created false invoices, fake invoices, to get reimbursed for this after the fact, after Donald Trump was already the sitting president of the United States. The media reports are saying that in February of 2017, Michael Cohen generated false invoices and submitted them to the Trump organization for payment or reimbursement for the things which Michael Cohen personally paid for. Okay? That has nothing to do with Donald Trump. And if Michael Cohen violated campaign finance laws as an attorney, he would have known what those laws are. As a person who was a senior member of the Republican National Committee finance team, he would have known what those laws are. As an individual who has raised money in the past for candidates, he would have known what those laws are and knew that he couldn't make those contributions. But he did so at his own accord, not at the direction of anybody else. He paid for it himself, is what he said, not at the direction of anybody else. And so Michael Cohen and Michael Cohen alone is the one who's responsible for those things and for the generation of false invoices to the Trump organization.
One of the things here that allegedly Cohen did is in getting the reimbursements, even before that, there was only one conversation that was taped, and they talked about this payment, and what did the president say? He said, well, be sure you pay it by check. I mean, doesn't that tell you right there that the president wanted, if this went forward, a complete accounting of the situation?
Well, that's exactly right. And it's my understanding, based on the tapes that we've seen, that obviously Michael has doctored now to cut off certain portions of it, where he said pay by check so that you have a record. There's traditionally, in cases like this, also a contract, a document which says we're going to pay you X amount of dollars. And I think this document has now been public. We're going to compensate Mary Smith X amount of dollars in a written document. We're going to give you a check for that. You're going to sign this document that says this is what the parameters of what the money is for. Michael Cohen drew up that document. Michael Cohen signed that document, as did at least one of the participants in this case. I believe the woman who goes by the name of Stormy Daniels actually signed a document saying, I acknowledge receiving this money from Michael Cohen. These are the terms of why I've received it, and I agree to the following terms. Okay, that was all done with Michael Cohen's personal signature on there through a company that Michael Cohen owned. This had nothing to do with the Trump organization. This had nothing to do with Donald Trump. This was Michael Cohen making a rogue decision, as he has done so many times, that now people are picking up the pieces on because he has such bad instincts that he thinks he's helping when he's actually hurting.
So none of these documents had Donald J. Trump's signature, right? They all
That's
had Cohen's
correct.
signature. So there's an argument to say that Cohen just went ahead and did this. Let me just ask you something, Corey, straight out. Is Michael...
Oh, he's much worse than a rat. He's a liar is the problem. And, rats are people who have a conscience, who decide that they want to turn evidence to protect themselves. Well, there's nothing to turn on Donald Trump is the difference. So Michael is a systemic and historic liar from day one. And what the reason the media has approached the Michael Cohen controversy with some trepidation is because they are so afraid that they are actually on these tapes as well, because Michael recorded every conversation he had with media outlets, and we know that for a fact. He has hundreds of tapes that he has recorded, not with Donald Trump, but other people in the media. So he's a historic liar. You can't keep changing your statements on what transpired. First, there was no payment made. Then Michael said he made the payment on his own. He was not directed by anybody. And the story keeps changing every single time until yesterday, where Michael knows he's facing 4 or 5 years in jail for what he did, not because anyone directed him to. Nobody directed Michael to file a false tax return. Nobody directed Michael to lie on a loan application. Nobody directed Michael to have $14 million in debt and try and work his way out of it. So every single thing that Michael has done has been because of his own mistakes, and he will be held accountable for that, and that's what it comes down to.
Corey, you're saying that Michael Cohen here is an habitual liar, and I see
True.
where you're going with it, and based on a lot of the things that have come out, could certainly make a pretty strong argument for that. I guess a lot of people look at this and they say, okay, well, he's got this history of lying. He was taping phone calls. The guy was kind of odd. I've told you the story before. I was only in Trump Tower a handful of times, but I was told immediately not to meet with him. Don't go in his office. He tapes everything. And I was not a regular there, and I was told that by people on your own team. So my question is, why did the president keep him around as his personal lawyer if he had this reputation of being somewhat nefarious?
Michael, I think, was a person for a period of time who enjoyed playing the tough guy role, the self-described fixer. The self-described Ray Donovan is who Michael Cohen thought he was. He thought that he was the person who would fix problems for then Mr. Trump in the private business world. Michael is the person on behalf of the Trump organization. When they had a problem with a vendor, he would go and negotiate that problem. When there was and we've seen a number of these now, where a media reporter would contact the Trump organization on a story that was false. Michael would then return those calls and threaten those reporters. On many occasions, many of those stories have been made public in the past. We've seen what he has said, that he's going to, physically harm somebody, assault somebody, whatever it is.
Destroy their career.
This is the standard operating procedure of Michael Cohen. And I believe most of this, not all of it, but the vast majority of this was done without the knowledge or the consent of the Trump organization or Mr. Trump specifically. And I think that's where Michael lived. He lived in a very gray, a very murky world where he would think himself as the fixer. But the bottom line is Michael just created more problems than he ever solved.
So I remember one time, just to buttress what you're saying, I saw him on TV once very early on in the campaign, and I thought he was dreadful. I don't even know where I was. And I texted you, and I said, why is this guy on TV? He's really hurting us. This was very early, Corey, in the campaign. And I guess I can share this text that's innocuous, but you texted me back and said you had nothing to do with it. It was completely on his own, and he didn't represent the campaign. Although he said he represented the campaign, which was also a lie.
See, John, that was the problem. Michael Cohen was an individual who never worked for the campaign when I was there. We didn't communicate. We didn't discuss strategy with Michael Cohen. But what Michael wanted to do in order to stay relevant is he would book himself on television appearances. And then he would go.
Not through the campaign.
He would not do it through the campaign. He wouldn't even let the campaign know. And he would go and make those television appearances in the morning, whether it was CNN, ABC, NBC, Fox News, whatever it was. And he would cause more problems for the campaign because he would talk about things that he candidly didn't know what he was talking about. He would make statements that we had to walk back after. You remember he went on television and said, "You can't rape your wife." One of the most absurd, outrageous things that has ever been said. And Michael Cohen said that, and then he says, well, I'm not an official spokesman for the campaign, but he would portray himself as an individual, at least on the periphery, associated with the campaign. And from the time I was there till the time I left, Michael had no formal role in the campaign. He wasn't compensated by the campaign. We didn't want him at the campaign. I did not want him at the campaign. And I did everything I humanly could do to keep him away from the campaign. And then, John, Donald Trump wins. And what does Michael Cohen do? He continues his narrative of deceit and lies, shaking down corporate America by telling those corporations that he is the president's personal attorney, and that he can fix their problems in Washington, D.C. We saw this with AT&T. We saw it with Novartis. We saw it with all these corporations that Michael picked up the phone and shook these people down for millions of dollars. And you know what they found out after the very first meeting? The same thing I found out. Michael was a person who cannot solve problems. He only created problems, who had no value, but they were locked into contracts. And many of those companies now, if not all of them, have regretted ever doing business with Michael Cohen.
And also, he misrepresented the access to the president that he had, right? No question about that, because he told them that he had access to him and he talked to him about these issues. And in reality, he was not really involved in that. So there could be the argument that that exactly wasn't represented up front and on the table. So what happens now with him?
Well, look, what's going to happen now is Michael is going to be sentenced in December. My guess is he's going to go to jail for the crimes that he has committed. He will be fined by the IRS. I think he owes about $1.3 million to the IRS for the tax evasion charges, and he will end up pleading to, and my guess is the Southern District of New York will accept the felonies that he has pled to, and Michael will go to jail for a period of time for violating the law, because there is nobody who's above the law. But what's very important here are the crimes that Michael committed, the financial crimes, the false tax returns. That has nothing to do with Donald Trump. The campaign violations which Michael said that he has committed have nothing to do with Donald Trump. Those are things that he will be held responsible for and should be held responsible for, but it comes back to the fact that Donald Trump did not direct Michael Cohen to make a payment, and even if he did make that direction, Michael Cohen, as an officer of the court, as a practicing attorney, should have said, I cannot make that if that's what he was directed to do. If the purpose of that payment was to help impact the outcome of an election or to benefit a campaign, Michael should have said, as an officer of the court, as an attorney, Mr. Trump, I cannot make that payment. But he didn't do that. Michael clearly made that payment on his own without the discretion or the knowledge of the candidate. Michael Cohen signed a contract with Stormy Daniels under his own name, through his own corporation, that he paid for. Not the Trump organization, not Donald Trump, that Michael paid for at the time in October because he thought it was the right thing to do, and that's what he's going to be held accountable for.
And that $130,000 he paid himself, because it was said that he got a line of credit. So it's not like he got a check for that from the Trump organization or from Mr. Trump's personal account, because when he paid it, he said he had to borrow it.
That's exactly right. So Michael had to go and he borrowed the money from a bank to make that payment at his own discretion. And clearly, the financial institution and the documents that he submitted were falsified. And that is part of the reason why Michael is going to be held accountable.
Corey, let's get to Paul Manafort. This is a day where yesterday Manafort convicted by a jury of his peers on 8 of the 18 counts. Again, did any of this have anything to do with Russian collusion, Donald J. Trump, Corey Lewandowski, campaign manager, or the Trump campaign?
The short answer, John, is no. And what Paul Manafort has now been found guilty of are crimes which he committed 10 to 12 years prior to him coming and volunteering for the Trump campaign for about a 4.5-month window. So what was stood up by the special prosecutor and looked into was supposed to be the direct collusion between the Trump campaign and someone or entities in Russia in order to impact the outcome of the election. That's what Bob Mueller's focus is supposed to be. Was there Russia collusion, cooperation or coordination between the Trump campaign and some Russians to impact the outcome of the election? And what Paul Manafort was found guilty of is very similar to what Michael Cohen has been found guilty of, which is filing false tax returns. In Paul's case, he also had overseas bank accounts, which he did not disclose. Those are clear violations. They're very easy to articulate that, yes, you had a bank account overseas. No, you didn't disclose it. Yes, you filed a false tax return. Nothing in the Paul Manafort guilty verdicts indicate that he had anything to do that there was any collusion between the Russians and the Trump campaign. Paul Manafort was not even accused of having any type of coordination, collaboration, or contact between the Trump campaign and the Russians that impacted the outcome of the election. What Paul has been found guilty of now is a crime which was committed 10 to 12 years ago based on his overseas consulting work that he made tens of millions of dollars. And look, the judge in the Manafort case was very clear. It is not illegal to be rich. It is not illegal to make a lot of money. What is illegal, and clearly a jury of his peers, 6 men and 6 women, agreed with the Mueller investigators, was that Paul did not file properly the taxes which he was required to pay on that money, and that he had overseas bank accounts which he did not disclose to the government. That's what Paul is guilty of. 18 counts. Paul was found guilty on 8 of those counts. The other 10 were a hung jury, meaning they could not come up to a unanimous decision. But ultimately, Paul is guilty of crimes which he committed 10 to 12 years prior to joining the Trump organization as a volunteer. So, John, think about this. 12 years is a long period of time. Mm-hmm. And if I were to hire someone today and I found out that 12 year ago they had a speeding violation, they had another violation, which was never disclosed, by the way, which we had no way to check or know, no private company, no private entity could have the access to Paul Manafort's tax records. It's impossible to get, right? Mm-hmm. Clear violation. How would I have ever known that Paul Manafort had been previously under investigation by the FBI? I never would have known that. The FBI never contacted me. They never said that Paul was under investigation prior to him coming to the campaign. Never did anybody contact us and say, we think that he has tax violations. Never, ever, ever. There's no way as a private entity, mm-hmm. the Donald Trump for president campaign, would I ever have that information. And the fact that Paul had violations that predate, not only his tenure with us, but my ever knowing Mr. Trump, and for that matter, 12 years ago, right. Not only was Donald Trump not a candidate for office, he was just a private citizen that nobody knew who Paul Manafort was, because Paul Manafort hadn't been in Republican Party politics since the invention of the fax machine. So, this is a guy who hasn't exactly been around, and there's no way we would have known, but he's been held accountable, and Paul's going to potentially go to jail now for, 10 or 15 years.
Well, it seems, and again, nothing to do with Russian collusion, nothing to do with the president, nothing to do with the campaign. All right, let's get to Papadopoulos, who lied to the FBI, who's now talking about maybe reversing, I guess, his plea. But I never heard of the guy during the campaign. I never heard you mention him. I think he was on a list because at the time you were looking for just people that supported the president. What did Papadopoulos have to do with anything?
He had nothing to do with anything. Literally, look, I'd be happy to, rethink this. I think I met the guy exactly one time. We had a meeting at the time in the old Trump Hotel prior to it opening. It was a national security meeting. It was chaired by then Senator Jeff Sessions, who was the head of our foreign policy national security team. Papadopoulos attended that meeting at the request of one of the other staffers. That is the only time I believe I ever had a direct contact face-to-face with George Papadopoulos. I didn't participate in the meeting. I was in and out. That meeting lasted 30 minutes, and he was one of, a dozen to 18 people who were in that meeting. So, again, he had nothing to do with the campaign. What I think George Papadopoulos probably did was, he's a relatively young guy. He wanted to go out and be a big shot. He wanted to go out and tell people, I'm part of the campaign. I can do this. I know this guy. I can, make my story much bigger than what I really am. Bottom line is he had no influence in the campaign whatsoever. But when the FBI brought him in, if he lied, that's what he will be accountable for. Because you cannot do that unless you're Hillary Clinton, unless you're, Cheryl Mills, unless you're any of the Clinton cabal who has time and time and time again lied to the FBI, unless you're Andrew McCabe, who lied under oath to his own organization and has not been prosecuted. If you're John Q. Citizen and you lied to the FBI, guess what? You're now a convicted felon. And that's what George Papadopoulos has been accused of and has basically found guilty of, is lying to the FBI. And John, you can't do it, but there has to be equity. There has to be an equity on both sides. And what we have seen is this FBI has been more corrupt than any FBI in the history of our country. The top 4 or 5 people at that organization have either been fired or demoted or have criminal referrals pending against them. And Andrew McCabe, who was the deputy director, who lied under oath on at least 3 occasions, according to the own IG report, has still not been charged with a crime. It's very simple. Either you tell the truth and you're not a felon, or you do what George Papadopoulos did and you lie to the FBI and you are a felon. And I think if George lied to the FBI, which is what they've accused him of, he should be held accountable. But there should not be 2 separate sets of rules, one for the Clinton cabal people, one for the FBI agents, and then one for everybody else.
It appears that's what you have. And again, Papadopoulos, no role in the campaign, not paid staffer, no formal responsibilities, just showed up at the meeting one day.
He literally showed up at one meeting, to the best of my knowledge. I don't believe I had any additional contact with him. I think I only met him that one time, very briefly, with 18 other people in that room, including the former chairman of the House Veterans Affairs Committee and so many others. But that's it. But there has to be accountability. And lying to an FBI agent is a felony unless you work for the government or you're part of the Clinton cabal, then you get away with it.
Jeff Sessions, should the president fire him?
No. I think Jeff Sessions needs to continue to serve as the Attorney General. I think Jeff Sessions needs to inject himself into the Mueller investigation where he can legally, just because he's recused himself of it, doesn't mean there aren't other issues that he can be part of. And what I think Jeff Sessions should demand and require is that a report to the Department of Justice is issued in a very timely manner. We have now seen the Mueller investigation go on for almost 2 years.
Right.
The cost of tens of millions of dollars to taxpayers. I think it is fair and equitable with what Mayor Giuliani said to get a report to the Department of Justice either saying we have concrete evidence that the president colluded, which we know did not exist, or we have concrete evidence, which we know is the truth, that the president had nothing to do with Russia collusion, that the campaign had nothing to do with Russia collusion, which was the entire premise of the special counsel. That report has to get to Congress. I think Labor Day should be the deadline, and I think the Attorney General should mandate that Rod Rosenstein and the others force the Mueller team to get them a report so that we can get this behind us.
Because really what the end game now is, the president can't be indicted. He's not going to be indicted. So they simply, you have to wrap it up, do whatever report it is, have the recommendations, send it to Congress, and then if Congress decides to act on it, it's going to be up to them. I mean, that's how the system works.
That's exactly right. So the Mueller team can write a report. They'll submit it to the Department of Justice. They will submit it to Congress, but it should be done very quickly because we don't want any report to potentially bias the elections in November.
Republicans have had 2 disasters here in the last 3 weeks. Chris Collins in Buffalo, insider trading. He resigned. Hopefully they can hold that seat. Now Duncan Hunter, 50th district in California. This is a seat that Hunter won last time, Corey, by 27. This is when you mail it in. Now he's indicted on, I read that indictment today when I got up today at 3:30. Just a litany of things, he and his wife, that he should know better than that. His father was in politics for a very long time. They can't get him off the ballot. This seat's at risk. You got this plea with Cohen, the indictment with Manafort, now the conviction. How do you guys hold the House?
You know, John, it's a great question. And when things like the Chris Collins thing happened or the Duncan Hunter thing happened, it makes it much more difficult. These were both districts where, had the Republican incumbent stayed, likely they would have won in both of those places. Now, I think we're going to have the opportunity to hold both of those seats, but it now requires resources. And by resources, I mean money. And there is a limited amount of money,
and people,
regardless, and people, right? And look, when you are in the party of power and you see things like this happen. Now, look, I think Chris Collins and Duncan Hunter will each have their opportunity and their day in court, and they are innocent until they're proven guilty because that's how the system works. The difference is when Republicans get in trouble, they flee. When Democrats get in trouble, they stand by each other regardless. When, you've got a congressman who's sticking cash in his freezer, they're standing by him, right? And saying, hey, it wasn't really a bribe. Oh, that's marked money in your freezer, Congressman. Don't worry about that. It's okay. And everybody stands by him. The Democrats are much better at Republicans because I believe we care about the system more candidly, is, hey, this person, if they're in trouble, is going to have their day in court, but now there is only so much money on the Republican side to go around. And the RNC, the Republican National Committee, has done a good job raising money. But we've got a series of districts around the country that are open seats due to retirements or redistricting, like in Pennsylvania, or candidly are seats where Hillary Clinton won 2 years ago that Republicans are sitting in, and some of those are in California. And that means we have to prioritize to make sure that the Republicans do not lose 23 seats. Because once you lose 23 seats, the race is over. Nancy Pelosi arguably becomes the next Speaker of the House. Jerry Nadler becomes the chairman of the Judiciary Committee. Maxine Waters, I believe, becomes the chairman of the Finance. That should be a scary thought for everybody. So, look, things like this do not help the Republican Party. The indictments of sitting members of Congress don't help. Is there still a path to keep the House? Yes. Does it get more difficult every day? You bet it does.
Can you win?
Look, I think you can win because you have an economy which is growing at a greater clip than any time in in the last 15 or 20 years. You've got historic unemployment numbers for African Americans and Asians and Hispanics and women and young people. So if your principal responsibility or principal concern is the economy, then you have to return Republicans back to Washington. If your principal concern is the safety and security of your family as it relates to national defense, Republicans have passed a massive spending bill to take care of our military and make sure that we remain the strongest military in the world. If your principal concern is stopping illegals like the animal who came in and we found out yesterday killed this poor girl in Iowa, an illegal alien who'd been in this country for, it looks to be, 6 or 7 years. Illegally, then we need to make sure we have a strong national border. And the Democrats had the chance to put a border wall up when they had control. They chose not to do it. So if those issues are of your concern, or the principal concern, whether it's national security, homeland security here on the domestic front, or it is the economy, then your only choice is to go and return the Republicans to Congress.
Well, that's going to be it. Corey Lewandowski, I want to thank you for your candor and forthrightness today. Former campaign manager Donald Trump for president. I know you're going to be out at many of the rallies coming up. The president's, I believe in talking to people, it looks like he's going to have a very busy schedule between now and November. He's very dedicated to going out. I think they're planning 8 rallies in about 8 states and fundraisers coming up, and they're going to go into key districts. So the president's going to be very, very busy in trying to maintain the House and grow the U.S. Senate.
I think that's right. And he and Vice President Pence have made a commitment to be on the road, making sure the Trump-Pence agenda is what people are voting on the ballot box. And in those races where they're making differences, they will be on the road campaigning for those candidates who are on the Trump-Pence agenda.
Steve Bannon says in order to win, Republicans have to nationalize this election and make it about Trump, not run away from Trump. Is he right?
He is right. Local elections we have successfully win. I think of Pennsylvania in the Connor Lamb district. When this election in November is a choice between Donald Trump and potentially Speaker Pelosi, Donald Trump wins every single time and twice as much on Sundays. And so the opportunity for Republicans to run on a national scale, what they've been able to achieve, is very important. If the Democrats run at the local level and continuously say that they are running against Nancy Pelosi's potential leadership, that's where they're going to be successful.
Thank you for being with us. Corey Lewandowski. Don't forget, buy his book, Let Trump Be Trump, best book written on the campaign. You got to buy it. Just go to your local bookstore, Amazon.com. Also, Corey, the new blockbuster coming out in November, Trump's Enemies from Within. He's going to name names. He's going to out people. This is going to be one of the biggest books ever written, potentially during a presidential tenure in history, and we're looking forward to that. Corey, I know you're busy working on it.
Thank you, John. It's going to be a great book. I'm very excited, and I think it's going to turn Washington, D.C. upside down because they can't fire me, John. It's already happened. Now I'm just an author.
I love that attitude. I've already been fired once. You can't fire me again. I love that. Corey, thank you.
Thank you, John.